Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started as we bring in the last few folks from the waiting room. So first, in terms of introductions, my name is Teresa Delcorso-Ellmann, and I'm an assistant dean in the School of Graduate Studies and the founding director of GradFund. And GradFund is the fellowship advising service provided by the School of Graduate Studies. And today's session is designed to give you an introduction to applying for fellowships and grants as a graduate student, along with the services that we provide through the GradFund Fellowship Advising Office. So on this webinar today is myself, and I'm joined by two of our GradFund Fellowship Advisors, Julia Romy and Melissa Wortman. And Julie and Melissa are going to be managing the chat, sharing some links through the chat, and also managing the Q&A. So some housekeeping issues just before we get started. If everyone can make sure that you are muted, that will be really helpful to make sure we're not getting any background noise or feedback. You can have your cameras on or off, it's your choice. I do want to mention that the session is being recorded, and we will be sharing an edited version of the recording on our YouTube channel later this month. We have a presentation that's going to go over a lot of information. And what I would ask is that if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will have time at the end of the session to address Q&A. So we're going to go through all of the information, and then there'll be a chance for us to answer questions and have a conversation. As we get underway, Julie and Melissa will also put into the chat a PDF form of the PowerPoint slides so that you can have that information for your records as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And just once again, as a way of introduction and to confirm everyone is where they want to be for this particular webinar, where our focus is going to be an overview of applying for grants and fellowships as a graduate student and the ways in which GradFund can assist you. And so before we really jump into this, I do want to share that later this afternoon at 3 p.m., there is going to be another session on applying for fellowships. And this is specifically geared towards students working in the biomedical sciences. And I am going to be part of a larger panel. GradFund will be covered. We'll basically cover the same information we're covering in this session. But the afternoon session is also going to highlight faculty who have experience serving as reviewers on NIH study section, and also panel of graduate students and their faculty mentors who will talk about their experiences of applying for funding. So I want to make sure that I put that information out there because it will be relevant to some of the folks on this call. I know everyone's time is limited and valuable. So if you're a biomedical science student and you prefer to attend the session at 3, please feel free to do so. You're welcome to stay on this call. You're also welcome to drop off. It's up to you. But in full disclosure, we basically, in terms of GradFund, will be covering the same kind of information. And one of the advisors, either Melissa or Julie, will be able to drop into the chat the registration link and the Zoom information for that 3 p.m. session. And so just another note on the chat, I just noticed somebody has messaged me. If you have a specific question, please either direct message Julia Romy or Melissa Wortman, who are part of my team. They will be able to assist you. I am not going to be monitoring the chat during the presentation. So they're going to be taking care of that on my behalf. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So just to begin, a quick overview, what we're going to look at are basically the world of funding for graduate students, grants, fellowships, scholarships. What are they? And the way we think about funding in graduate education is there are two large buckets of funding. There is internal funding and there's external funding. Internal funding is money that comes from Rutgers, from the university, typically from your graduate program, to help support your graduate studies. And that could be in the form of an assistantship, a teaching assistantship, a graduate assistantship, or the forms of a fellowship. And that's going to be primarily for doctoral students. That's how doctoral students, PhD students, are supported in their graduate education, is they get a start with a funding package coming from their graduate program. And that's not what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about today is going to be external funding. So that's going to be money from outside of the university that is designed to specifically support students who are pursuing graduate degrees. And when we think about external funding, we want to begin to think about, kind of what's the purpose of it and how can you effectively apply for it? And so the first thing that's really important to know in terms of external funding is that there's a lot of individual key factors that will begin to help you as an applicant answer the question of what can I apply for and what's the best thing for me to apply for? And those factors are going to be things like academic preparation. So what are the degrees that you've earned so far as you come into your graduate program? What's your personal background, personal lived experience, and how does that influence your graduate study? Importantly, what is your stage of study? So that means both what is the degree that you're pursuing? Are you doing a master's degree? Are you working on a PhD? And where are you in that course of study? What are your career goals? Why is it important for you to pursue a graduate degree? What do you hope to do with that program of study? And how does that map to your career goals? And then finally, the area of study. So what that means is going to be the particular discipline or subject matter that you're looking at. And all of these elements are going to help you begin to identify the most relevant awards. In graduate education, the types of external funding that are available really focus in on the types of awards being either grants or fellowships. And from there, they can take a lot of different forms. There can be fellowships to support the writing up of your dissertation or thesis. There can be travel grants. There can be grants that will support language study or specialized training. Perhaps you want to go to a methods camp or gain particular expertise in running a certain kind of experiment in your lab. So there can be different types of financial support to support those different types of activities. Now, a lot of times when we talk about applying for external funding, we use the terms grant and fellowship interchangeably, and they actually mean specific things. And so I think it's always useful to have a set of definitions that can help you understand how to navigate and evaluate the funding landscape that's available to you. So a grant, a research grant, is going to typically provide financial support for research-related expenses. So this can mean that you need to go to an archive to look at documents for your research, that you need to go to a research site to collect data, and maybe that's ethnographic data. Maybe you're going to conduct a survey. Maybe you want to interview people. It could be expenses related to the work that you do in a lab in terms of the research and the experiments that you're running. It may mean that research-related expenses in terms of going to visit a partner lab elsewhere and be able to spend time there and run some experiments. Meanwhile, a fellowship is going to be designed to provide you with a stipend, so to cover your living expenses. So what that means is funding so that you don't need to have a teaching assistantship, or you don't need to work part-time or full-time as you pursue your graduate studies, that you will have a fellowship that is going to provide you with the living expenses that you need to be able to pursue your studies and focus on them full-time. So next, we're going to provide you with an overview of GradFund services and the ways in which we work with graduate students. So as I said at the start of the program, we are a service of the School of Graduate Studies, and our mission is to help students identify and apply for extramural or external funding. We have been in existence here at Rutgers since 2000, so we're now in our 22nd year. And in that time, we very conservatively estimate that we've helped graduate students at Rutgers win over $100 million in external support. And the reason that I like to highlight that is because of what it represents. And it represents hundreds and thousands of graduate students over the years, similar to the group that are on this call, who while they were graduate students, became interested in learning more about funding opportunities that were available, began to work with us on fellowship and grant applications, and were successful. And that success may mean that they were able to secure a modest research grant, maybe of $2,000, or maybe a large, generous fellowship that was worth $50,000 or $60,000. And so what that $100 million really represents is a lot of graduate students applying for funding successfully. And that's the key takeaway message, that this is something that, that you're able to do as a graduate student, that you can do successfully, and we are here to help support that success. So this slide details our core services, and we're going to, as we get deeper into the presentation, go into a little more detail about each of these services. But we have, in brief, a wide range of services that are really designed to meet students where they are in terms of their graduate study and in terms of the kind of support that will best help them to succeed. So this is also where I like to mention a bit more about our fellowship advising model, because it is something that is unique, and I think is a really exciting opportunity for all of our graduate students. So we work on a peer mentoring model. And what that means is that I have working with me a team of doctoral candidates who are trained to be able to work with fellow graduate students and help them navigate the process of applying for funding. So Melissa and Julie are two members of our fellowship advising team. They are PhD candidates, and this is part of their PhD support as they pursue their degrees, is to work in the GradFund office and to work with graduate students on applying for funding. So what that means is that when you come in and use our services, you're interacting not just with me, but also with a team of graduate students who have been specifically trained to work with fellow graduate students on this process. So this is also where I'd like to drop in some key advice. And this is advice and guidance that I offer to all graduate students. And so the first thing to keep in mind is that in terms of navigating the process of applying for external grants and fellowships, we're here to help. We've designed a suite of services that are really designed to help you start at the beginning, to answer the very basic questions of what can I apply for and how can I do this well, and help you understand how to navigate the funding landscape. The first key piece of advice that I give to all graduate students is that you want to think about how can you integrate the process of applying for fellowships and grants into your graduate career. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about that idea and why it is so important. So the first reason why it's so important is because, as I'd mentioned earlier, a lot of determining the answer to the question of what can I apply for really depends on the degree that you're working on, your field of study, and your stage of study. And so what that means is that as you move through your program of study, you're actually moving in and out of eligibility for different awards. So it's a really good idea early on in your graduate study to begin to understand what your funding landscape looks like, so that you understand the portfolio of awards that really matches to your research interest, your field of study, your career goals, but also helps you understand when is the best moment for you to actually submit an application for a particular opportunity. And that's important to keep in mind, because not only are you moving in and out of eligibility for different awards as you make progress through your program, it's really important to understand what the timeline is for applying for funding and then the ultimate awarding and distribution of those funds. So the simplest way to think about this is that this is a long-term process, and that you are applying for funding the academic year before you're going to actually use the money if it's awarded to you. So deadlines are typically once a year. There's a handful of examples where some funders may have deadlines 2 or 3 times a year, but the real standard is once a year. The majority of the deadlines for graduate student opportunities falls sometime between September and March. And the fall deadline season in particular is the heavy deadline season. So we are really in the midst of things right now in mid-September, and there'll be deadlines week after week after week from now until the end of the year. There'll be some more deadlines in January, a few more in February, and as we get into March, things really do start to slow down. So remember that you're applying for funding the academic year before you're going to use that funding. So if you're thinking about, I would really love to have a fellowship next year, maybe while I'm doing my dissertation research, what that means is now is the time that you want to apply for that fellowship so that the money is available to you a year from now. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And that's part of why it's important to think about how are you integrating this into your graduate study as you move through your course requirements and you're moving through stages of study, understanding and looking ahead by a year to 18 months. What are you not only doing today, but what do you want to do a year from now? And what is the funding that can help you support those activities a year from now? So the other key piece of advice is that applying for funding is a professional development activity. And I think it's really helpful to think about that is your primary goal. That is the goal that you want to have even before thinking about, I really need money. So this is about merit-based funding designed to help support students at certain stages of graduate study. So that means it functions very differently than need-based financial aid, which is incredibly important, but isn't the focus of the work that we do and functions in a different way. So, you're going to be much more successful in this endeavor if you think about applying for funding first and foremost as a professional development activity. So what does that mean? What that means is that you're in the process of pursuing a graduate degree, whether that's a master's degree or a PhD. And that, in your future career, you will most likely be applying for funding in some form or another. If you're pursuing a PhD or a research-based master's degree, then applying for funding is most definitely in your future because that's part of your professional activities as a researcher. If you're pursuing a practitioner-based degree, you may or may not be engaged in research. You may or may not be applying for research funds, but my guess is that your future job will involve putting forward proposals for support, whether it's financial support or in-kind support of materials and supplies and time to support particular projects. So, it's important to keep in mind that the process of applying for funding is an important activity. It's a central activity for researchers, and it's something that is learned in terms of what are best practices in grantsmanship and learned in terms of how to write an effective funding proposal. It's its own unique form of writing, its own genre, which is different than the writing that you do inside of your discipline. So another way of thinking about applying for fellowships and grants is that it will most definitely help to support and bring resources into your graduate study and into the research you want to do. But whether or not you're successful with a particular grant or fellowship application, it is going to give you the opportunity to learn a crucial skill that you will want to use and that you will need to use throughout your career. So the final piece of advice that I give to all graduate students is to really set for themselves a personal goal that every year that you're in graduate school, you're applying for at least one fellowship or grant. Now, there will be years, especially if you're a PhD student, when you are most likely applying for more than one fellowship or grant in a particular application cycle. And that's appropriate, that's typical. But I would say at the very least, try to identify at least one opportunity that you can apply for each year. What that will do for you is it will give you that important practice as a professional development activity. And if you're successful, it brings resources into the graduate work you're doing. And so what that means is that, if you can secure a small grant that will let you do a pilot study for your dissertation, that strengthens your dissertation project. It also demonstrates a funding track record that will help to enhance your competitiveness when you go to apply for a larger grant in the next application cycle. So going from some of that key advice, I want to go into a bit more detail about the services that we provide to graduate students. So our individual advising appointments are, I would say, the most popular service that we offer to graduate students. So we offer virtual advising appointments. Before the pandemic hit, about 50% of the advising that we did with students one-on-one was virtually based. And then obviously when we went to the pandemic, we went to 100% advising appointments. And what we learned out of that was that virtual advising works really well for our graduate students. It looks like we have nearly 60 people on this call. And while I don't have the list of participants right in front of me, my guess is you all are representing the broadest range of our graduate programs in terms of discipline, but also in terms of geography. That some of you are out on the Bush campus, some of you are on the Cook campus, some of you are on Douglas, some of you are here on College Ave, some of you may be up in the Newark Health Sciences campus. Some of you may actually not be on campus. You may be out in the research field working on things. And so this is why virtual advising works so well for our graduate student population, because you don't need to worry about making it to a particular building to meet with us. We will send you a Zoom or WebEx link, and we will be happy to hold that meeting with you virtually. Now, we offer 3 different types of appointments that are really designed to help you walk through the process of applying for funding. You don't have to do all 3. You can do the type of meeting that you prefer, and you can have more than one meeting. So to start, our planning meeting is our very basic meeting, which is designed to help you become familiar with the tools and resources that will empower you to navigate the external funding landscape. So in the planning meeting, you're going to meet with a fellowship advisor. They're going to talk with you a bit about your research, what you're working on, your funding questions and concerns. And then they're going to show you how to use a set of tools so that you can begin to identify funding opportunities that are available to you. Our help with the funder meeting is a bit more of a deep dive where you've identified a particular funding opportunity, you're preparing to put together an application, and you may have some questions. And you want to have a conversation with a fellowship advisor to better understand the opportunity and strategies for writing a competitive and successful application. And then our application review appointment is going to be designed to provide you with feedback on application materials that you are developing for a particular fellowship or grant application. And for the application review appointment, which I would say is our most popular of our 3 appointments, it's really important to keep in mind that we've intentionally designed this so that it is complementary to the feedback and support that you're receiving from your faculty as you develop these application materials. So what does that mean? First and foremost, what it means is that we expect that you are working closely with your faculty on developing these materials. A key element to writing a competitive application is to have faculty input, both in terms of the essays that you're developing and also because your faculty will be writing letters of recommendation for you. So you want to make sure you're engaging your faculty in this process early on and that you really see it as a collaborative partnership with your faculty mentors. So knowing that you're working closely with your faculty, we have designed our application review to be value added and complementary to the feedback that you'll be getting from your faculty. So if you recall, we work on a peer mentoring model. And part of what that means is that you're working with a fellowship advisor who's also a graduate student like you, but is not from your home discipline. So they're not an expert in your discipline. They're not an expert in the project that you're working on. What they are an expert in is best practices in fellowship writing and best practices in how to give a peer advice and feedback on application materials. And they're going to be able to provide you with advice from the perspective of an outside reader, somebody who's not an expert in your field of study. And that's critically important because when you apply for a fellowship or a grant and you submit it through an application portal, the first thing that it goes through is a process called peer review, which means that it is being read and evaluated by a panel of faculty, and they may or may not be experts on your particular topic or on your field of study. And so one of your goals when you're writing your application essays is to understand who your review audience is and how to effectively communicate your research ideas to the audience in that review panel. And that's where a grad fund advisor and having an application review appointment with them can be incredibly helpful, because they will help you understand the outsider perspective on your materials. They'll be able to point out to you the jargon that you may not realize that you're using that is making it difficult for them to understand this because they're not from inside of your field. They'll be able to point out to you kind of where the logic falls off in the narrative, because you're assuming the reader knows things that an expert would know, but as a non-expert, we wouldn't know these things. So it's really useful to think about that application review as being complementary. You want, when you're writing an application and getting feedback, you want to get feedback from people who are experts in your field and people who are not experts in your field. And your goal is to write an essay that is going to speak to both the expert and the non-expert in an equally clear and compelling way. So next, I just want to highlight for you, each fall semester, we run a number of different workshops and information sessions. So this is an example of one of our webinars. And what we're launching this semester for the first time is our strategic proposal writing series. So on this slide, you see it's a 4-part series meeting every Thursday afternoon for the next month. And either Melissa or Julie will be able to put into the chat the links for registering for them. Each session has its own registration link. So, you want to make sure that you're registering. If you want to do all 4, that's great, but make sure you're submitting 4 registrations. They can also drop in the link to the GradFund website, where we've got all of these details posted as well, so that you can easily go and find them. But if you are at the point where you're actually engaged in writing your funding application, these workshops are going to be instructive, but also hands-on, where you're going to be able to work in small groups with people on some of these concepts and ideas that we've organized these workshop themes around. So if you're in the process of working on fellowship or grant applications, I would highly recommend that you take advantage of these upcoming workshops in strategic proposal writing. So let's see if I can get this to advance. And my apologies, it looks like there we go. Okay. So what I have here on this screenshot is a visual to show you how to schedule a grad fund appointment. So we book our appointments through a meeting platform called WC Online. And when you go to your my.rutgers.edu page, one of the widgets that you should see on your dashboard is the grad fund widget. And so this screenshot shows you what it looks like. And you may have to hunt around, but it should be somewhere on either that first or second level of your my.rutgers.edu portal. And when you're ready to schedule an appointment, all you'll do is click on the schedule an advising appointment, and that will take you to the meeting platform. What you will be doing at that point is it will be authenticating you as a Rutgers student. So it takes you through the Rutgers login. If it will be your first time visiting us, you'll get a prompt to set up an intake form where you'll give us some information. If you met with us before, it will take you into the calendar. And from there, you can schedule the kind of appointment that you're looking for. And you can select the date, the time, the fellowship advisor, the meeting type. So something that I always like to make sure students know is that you can easily book an appointment. And in order to confirm an appointment, you need to give us documents. So every meeting requires documents in order to move forward. So you just want to keep that in mind. And when you go into the booking platform, there's information that will detail the kind of documents that we need and the timetable in which we need them. Briefly, though, an overview of this is, if you are scheduling a planning meeting or a help with a funder meeting, and I'll go back to that slide just so you have that information in front of you. So if you schedule a planning meeting or a help with a funder meeting, what we need from you is a CV or a resume. So my advice is, if you're booking one of those meetings, when you book that meeting, just pull from your desktop, upload your CV or your resume, and then your meeting is confirmed and you're all set to go. So what if you don't have a CV or a resume? that's fine. This is your opportunity to make one. It doesn't need to be anything fancy or sophisticated. We're looking for some basic information. We want to know who you are, how to contact you, which degree program you're in, and it's something about your experiences, whether they're research related or professional. So, I always tell students, if you don't yet have a CV or a resume, a GradFund appointment is a really good excuse to get working on developing that document and using it to confirm your appointment. For the application review appointment, we will need a copy of the essays that you would like for us to look at and review and critique with you. So you can schedule an appointment at any time, but we need to have those meeting documents at the very latest 2 days before the meeting is scheduled to run. And that's by 2 days, 9 a.m. before the meeting is scheduled to run. So if you forget to upload the documents, and the system can send you reminders so you don't forget, but if you do forget and we don't have your documents, it does mean that we will be canceling your appointment. And you're welcome to reschedule, but it's really important for us to have documents because that gives us important information that allows us to prepare and run a meeting with you that is going to be really worth your time. It's going to be rich in substance and conversation and help you be able to move forward with your plans of applying for funding. So that's just, some details about booking an appointment. My next slide just gives you a screenshot of the main landing page of our website. And once again, my team members can make sure they have dropped into the chat the main URL that will take you to the GradFund website. As you can see on the GradFund website, we do have our own database of funding opportunities that you can go in and begin to research and identify opportunities. And a planning meeting, a fellowship advisor will help you really understand how to use this search effectively and get out of it the information that's going to be most useful for you. Another resource that I want to make sure I highlight is that on Canvas, we have a GradFund self-paced guide to grants and fellowships. And so this is really a Canvas course that will take you step by step through the process of identifying and applying for fellowships and grants. So we have on this slide the URL that you can use to register to join the course. And one of the grad funders will also drop that URL into the chat so you have it as well. Something new that we've launched this semester is the GradFund channel on YouTube. And so this just gives you a screenshot of some of the videos that we currently have up there. And this webinar, once we have the recording rendered and cleaned up a bit, will also be added to the YouTube channel so that you can access the recording and revisit it or share it with your friends if they weren't able to attend the session. And once again, one of the grad funders will drop into the chat the direct link to the GradFund YouTube channel. So we also have resources on Rutgers Connect. And so this is information and resources that we don't have on our website, we don't have in the Canvas site, that is additional guides, sample proposals, additional webinar recordings that you can get to through RU Connect or Teams on RU Connect. And once again, you have the PDF, so you can always scan the QR code, and one of the grad funders will drop the direct links into the chat for you as well. So we've got lots of GradFund digital resources to help support you and help supplement the individual appointments and also the webinars and the workshops that we run. The last resource that I want to share with you is not a GradFund resource, but it's a university resource, and it's really a valuable tool to have. And so it's called Pivot. And what Pivot is a funder database that is much more robust and powerful, frankly, than the database that we've created on our own website, which is very, very basic, but very much targeted to graduate students. The Pivot database is it targets a broader universe of funding opportunities. So there's opportunities for students, but there's obviously also opportunities for faculty and for institutions. So what that means is that it's helpful to learn how to use pivot so you can make sure you're narrowing and constraining the search so that it speaks to your particular context as a student. And in the planning meeting, one of the things that we do is we will work with you to make sure you're able to access pivot. We'll show you how to set up a search, how to begin to interpret the results so that you can then further refine that search. Some of the really nice tools that Pivot offers that I encourage all students to take advantage of is that you can set up searches and save them to your account and then schedule for them to run periodically. And then Pivot will send you updates from those searches, whether that's new awards that map to your search criteria or reminders of upcoming deadlines relevant to the awards that map to your search criteria. There's also a nice function where if you're so inclined, you can build a list of awards with deadlines. You can import those deadlines into your own personal calendar and then have your own grants calendar that will help keep you on track and help you with some of that near-term and long-term planning with that goal of how do you integrate applying for funding into your graduate career. So Pivot, like I said, is not a GradFund tool, but it's a resource that the university subscribes to, that as university students you have access to, and I encourage everyone to make good use of this resource. So this is a screenshot of the Pivot landing page, and the grad funders will drop in the direct link so you have that. And you just want to make sure that you log in. Following that, use login from my institution. It will take you through the Rutgers credentialing system, and you'll be able to access the database and set up your own account and your own searches. So in terms of next steps, where do we go from here? You've had this, big overview of fellowships, grants, grad fund services, and resources. And we really designed this just to be, a starting point for you to help you to get started. So next steps, spend some time on our digital resources, take a look at them, become familiar with them. If you're so inclined, register for an upcoming workshop or webinar. If you've not yet done so, be sure to set up your Pivot account. And most importantly, perhaps feel free to schedule an appointment with us. If you want help getting the Pivot account set up and learning how to, identify funding opportunities, schedule a planning meeting. If you are looking for help with a specific award, a help with a funder meeting is a great way to start. If you are already working on fellowship applications, schedule an application review so we can take a look at your application materials and give you feedback and help you to strengthen your applications. And so with that, this concludes the formal presentation. We have about 15 minutes left for Q&A. So I am going to end the slideshow and stop the screen share. So that lets me get a better view of everyone who's on the call. And Melissa and Julie, would you like to help us with some questions that have been coming in through the chat? I think the easiest thing is if you can read out to me some questions that I can respond to. If there's more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and Julie and Melissa will manage the chat, and we'll make sure that we can get to as many questions as possible.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Julie. I'm one of the GradFund Fellowship Advisors. So let's see, I have a list collected of all your questions, so don't worry about us missing anything. So we have a couple people who asked for a list of awards and fellowships in their area, in a couple different areas.
Yes, that is a good question. Such an important question. I know everyone wants a list. So we don't give lists. What we do is we empower you to build your own list. Now, why is that? The main reason is, and I will say I've been doing this for 25 years, and sometimes I can give people a list. So for instance, I can say to the historians, here are 5 things that every single historian can apply for. And I don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is because they can apply for those 5 things, but I don't want to limit them to those 5 things. The reality is that the answer to the question of what can I apply for is highly individualized. So that's what we help you understand with and develop with a planning meeting, is we're going to help you understand what your funding landscape looks like based on your degree and your discipline, your research interests. We're going to help you understand how to use these tools. We're going to run some searches with you and help you interpret those results so you know if you're getting good results or not. And we're going to give you the tools that you need to build your own list that's going to be specific to you and your research interests.
Okay, so another question, a quick one we have is, will there be recordings available of the Thursday afternoon seminars, the workshops on application components?
So those are interactive. So the recording will be limited to the educational material that's presented, but not the interactive pieces. So if your schedule allows you to attend live, my advice would be to do so. That will be the most robust learning experience for you.
Okay. We have a lot of questions about international students, what they're eligible for, how to search for international specific awards. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure thing. So that's another really popular question. We have a large international student population. So the first thing that I want to say is that there are things that international students can apply for. That, my advice of, we don't give lists, that we help you identify what your individual funding landscape is and what is available to you, is universal advice, whether you're an international student or a domestic student. And that what I will say in general is that there is funding for international students. What we see, especially for folks who are in STEM-based disciplines, there is not going to be a lot of funding for international students in the early stages of their career. And that's because a lot of the funding opportunities are coming from the US federal government and will require that the applicant is a US citizen or permanent resident. However, as you move through your degree requirements and go further along and deeper into your research, what we see is that the focus of the funder is not so much on what is the nationality or background of the applicant, but rather what is their research. And as long as you are enrolled in a US-based university and working on a research project that the funder is interested in, they'll be interested in funding you. So as you move further along into your degree program, especially as a PhD student, there will be more opportunities for you as an international student. My general advice to international students is that there are opportunities out there. Schedule a planning meeting with us and we will help you understand how to find the information that's most relevant for you. Julie, did I understand that there sound like there's a second part to your question? Was there a question specifically about funding to go overseas?
Not so far, there hasn't been.
Okay.
But if anybody has that question, please let us know.
Okay.
So we have a question from Yang, who I think, Yang, you might have to clarify what you mean by this a little bit. Yang asks, do you also help with providing the information of funding resources or only help with the procedure of application, like the materials and interviews?
So, Yang, I'll answer your question based on how I think I understand it, but if it's not if I've misunderstood it, please feel free to unmute and verbally ask your question. So we help in all of those realms. And, it really is going to be for you as a graduate student to decide what aspect of our services are you interested in. You could be interested in all of them. So our starting point is with that planning meeting. It really is to help you understand how to identify opportunities that are available to you and how to evaluate those opportunities and make a decision if you want to work on an application or not. We will also help you with that help with the funder meeting and that application review meeting, really begin to understand how do you craft the application material so that they are going to be as competitive as possible. Depending on what you're applying for, you may need to work with different university offices to process that application. And that could be through the research office in your specific school. It could be through the university's Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. And so, if you're working with us and we see that you're working on an award that requires you to go through the different institutional offices here at the university, we will alert you to that and make sure that you're connecting with the right people so you can also work with them in collaboration on your application. So did that answer the?
Okay, great. So our next question comes from Casey, who asks, are graduate students only eligible for fellowships/grants if they are conducting research? And I had responded in the chat to say, no, there are fellowships of all kinds for all different stages. Can you expand on that a little bit, Teresa?
Sure thing. And that's a great question. So I want to start out by saying we've got on this call, a large, great group of people. And, there are folks here who are pursuing master's degrees. There are folks here who are pursuing PhDs. There are folks who are in coursework. There's folks who are in research. So we've got people doing all different kinds of things. Graduate education is a big umbrella that covers a lot of different kinds of activities. And so in the realm of grants and fellowships, I would say if you're applying for a grant that, you're most likely that's going to be tied to some kind of research-based activity. So it's going to cover research-related expenses and activities. A fellowship, though, will provide support to help, support somebody if they're working on research full-time, or maybe if they're in coursework full-time. And so, this gets back to that question of, why can't I have a list? And the answer is because we take into context all of those little details to help you analyze the funding landscape that's available to you. And so, that does a couple of things. One is that, thinking about the question of, well, why do I need funding? What is it going to support? And if it's going to support you while you're in coursework, that's going to be one award mechanism. If it's going to support you while you're conducting dissertation research, that's a different award mechanism. And what that also means is that when I talked about earlier about how as you move through your program requirements, you're moving in and out of eligibility for different activities. So there will be some fellowships that will specify this is for graduate students who are in coursework. So if you're done with your coursework and you're going through the qualifying process for your PhD, that's not a fellowship for you. And if there will be other funders who will say this is money that is specifically to support a student who's doing dissertation research. If you're in the first year of your PhD program and you're still in coursework, you're not going to be eligible for that dissertation-based award. So you see, it's a rather complex landscape. And part of what we're going to do is help you understand how to interpret the information that you're getting, and more importantly, how to build a plan that's going to be strategic so that it aligns with your graduate study goals and your timeline for working on your degree.
Okay, so we have a technical question from Laura saying, do I use my NetID and password on WC Online? I do not see the GradFund widget on my Rutgers.
Okay, so Laura, why don't you write into the Fellowship Advisor account, maybe Julie or Melissa, if you can drop the Fellowship Advisor email address into the chat. Why don't you write into that account and we'll have somebody follow up with you individually.
Okay, so anyone else who has any questions about signing up for the logistics of signing up for appointments, please also email us. So let's see, we have a follow-up on international students from Suri. She asks, I'm an international student but have permanent residency to the US. Should I search for international fellowships or for US citizens?
So what I would say is that when you use the so I'd say a couple of things. When you use the GradFund database, you can search specifically on permanent resident status, and that will show you awards that you would be eligible for as a permanent resident of the United States. A best practice for all students is that when you find an opportunity that interests you, to look very carefully at the eligibility requirements, and you want to look at the details in terms of citizenship requirements, in terms of degree requirements, the type of degree that you're in, the stage of study. Some funders are very good at giving a lot of detailed information. Others maybe don't provide as much detail and it's a little ambiguous. It's always a good idea if you have a question about your eligibility for an opportunity to contact the program officer and ask for clarification. So let me unpack that for you. A program officer is going to be a professional staff person who works for the funder that's offering the fellowship or grant opportunity. And their job is to be a resource for applicants and potential applicants so that they can get answers to questions, get information that they need, and that they, to make sure that that people who are a good match for the opportunity are applying. So you shouldn't be afraid to reach out to a program officer and ask for clarification if it isn't clear if you're eligible. You also shouldn't assume you're not eligible if you don't see the information. It's always a good idea to ask and have somebody confirm for you whether or not you're eligible. If you assume you're not eligible and it was the wrong assumption, you've lost out on an opportunity. So I know that we're just about to hit the 2 o'clock hour. Julie, can you give me a sense of how many
Um,
questions we have left?
Sure. So we have about 2 more questions left. We have
Okay.
one person asking, is it possible to apply for grants before the proposal defense? And if possible, will that affect the outcome? I assume you mean dissertation research grants. And then we have another question asking how to decide who to ask for recommendation letters besides an advisor.
Okay, great. Really good questions. So the first question, if I understand it correctly, so, the timing of when do you apply is going to be driven by the funder's deadline and their eligibility requirements. And so, kind of especially around proposal defense for PhD students, some funders will say, in order to be eligible to apply, your proposal to already be accepted by your committee. Other funders may say that your proposal doesn't have to be accepted by the committee at the time of application, but it needs to be accepted by a certain date in the future. So it's really important to look at those details. The second part of the question about does that funding application and its correlation to the proposal defense impact the outcome. It's not clear if the question is, does that impact the outcome of the grant application or the proposal defense? What I would say is that it will not have an impact on the proposal defense. That's between you and your committee. And it will not have an impact or should not have an impact on the outcome of the grant, because whether or not your proposal is accepted will be part of the eligibility requirements, and you're going to be competing against a pool of applicants who are all at the same status as yours. So, those are two events that work together, but they are also independent of each other. On the question about letters of recommendation, that's a really important question. And so it's important to think strategically about who your letter writers will be. Every fellowship and grant application will have a different set of requirements for the numbers of letters, if they require letters. And it's really important to make sure you understand, what the requirements are. It's always a good idea to have your advisor be one of those letter writers. And in some cases, the competition may require that the advisor is a letter writer. And outside of that, you want to choose faculty who know you well. And that may be faculty that you've taken a class with, faculty who, are part of your committee, if you're a PhD student, and you just want to think strategically about people who know you and your work. And so it's a nice way of thinking about this as an opportunity for me to get to know my faculty better in terms of I want to build a relationship with them. I want to have them on my committee. And so a good way to begin building that relationship is by talking with them about fellowship applications and seeing if they'd be willing to write a letter. If you are a relatively new graduate student, I know sometimes a lot of first-year graduate students will say, I'm more comfortable asking my undergraduate faculty to write letters than the graduate faculty who I'm just getting to know. My advice and the advice of many program officers is that if you're a graduate student, you want to try and have at least one, if not 2 or 3 letters written by your graduate faculty. And what's important to remember is that you're currently a graduate student, so they want to hear from the faculty that you're currently working with. And you may submit an application in November. It's going to be reviewed in January and finally decided on in March. And so, in the mindset of the reviewer, you're not so much a new graduate student, you're well past your first semester of graduate school into your second semester. And the expectation is that you're, deeply immersed in graduate education, working with your graduate faculty. So, I always say applying for fellowships is a good opportunity to kind of assess where you are in your relationships with your faculty and to see it as an opportunity to build and strengthen those relationships. So with that, we are at time, and I would like to thank all of you for attending, for asking your wonderful questions. If you have follow-up questions that you think of or that we weren't able to get to, you can always send an email to our fellowship advisor account, and we'll make sure that that's dropped into the chat again so everyone has it. And I encourage all of you to follow up with an individual appointment so you can meet with a member of the GradFund team, and we can help you determine next steps in terms of the fellowships and grants that you may want to apply for as a graduate student. And as I mentioned earlier, the session is being recorded, and once we have the recording cleaned up, we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel. So thank you all for joining us. Have a good afternoon, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.